Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hello, and welcome to episode 82 of the Near Memo with David, Mike, and me, where we talk about search, social, and commerce through a local lens. And as always, lots of news, but we'll be focusing in mostly on search and Google this week, always perennial topics. And we're going to be talking about Google's outreach to small businesses to get them to lobby against antitrust reform. We're also going to be talking about Apple search and whether or not that's interesting, viable, has a future, what's going on there. And I will be talking about threats to Google. Are these new search paradigms, search alternatives really meaningful? Do they represent any concrete threat long-term to Google's search dominance? So Mike, why don't we start with you and the outreach that Google did to small business owners this week?
Right. So this is sort of an embarrassing story because I, who think of myself as the ultimate skeptic, was deceived by an email I received from Google. It came from Google Customer Solutions, and I thought, oh, what is this? Maybe it's about my Google My Business listings. I have no idea. Maybe it's about ads. I'm not sure. But then the subject was, tell us what policy issues matter to you and your business. And I thought, oh, is Google really want to know that I want universal health care so that small businesses can compete, or that taxation isn't equitable between big corporations and little ones? Oh, cool. Let me go. And I immediately went and I hit the big call to action in the middle of the email, which I didn't read the two paragraphs. I get out to their survey, and the survey is, which issues are you most interested in learning about? And it's all the issues that Google has with current tech regulations, privacy, antitrust. And then they want to know which of these activities I am willing to do in terms of lobbying. It had nothing to do with the email that they sent me for the calls to action. I then went back and read the email and realized, oh, this is just more of Google's small business targeting to help them, Astroturf their complaints against the government. It was just so, I fell for it. And that is on one hand embarrassing, but on the other hand, it's telling. Google knew what they're doing. This was not an accident that this was from Customer Solutions. It wasn't from their political arm. It wasn't an accident that the subject was deceptive. It wasn't an accident the call to action was deceptive. This was intentional. And it's embarrassing to me on two levels. One, I'm embarrassed for Google for some reason. And two, I'm embarrassed that I fell for it.
Well, what's
Google
interesting
clearly has no shame, Mike, so I don't think you have to be embarrassed on their behalf. But
well, so what Google did is very kind of sophisticated here in terms of manipulation, psychological manipulation. So they give you this sort of neutral outreach that makes you think this is something having to do with your business. So they probably got some very high open rate, and then they ask you this kind of neutral question: what are you interested in learning about? And then they say, if you felt your business interests were at risk, what would you be motivated to do? And then they list these options: signing a petition, attending an in-person advocacy event, sharing your views on social media, emailing lawmakers, calling lawmakers. And then they ask, have you participated in issue advocacy before, signing petitions and contacting lawmakers? So what they're doing is they're sort of identifying segments and their willingness to do certain kinds of things. And then they're going to contact these people again. They'll get some, they have millions and millions of businesses on their list. And so they'll get some positive responses. And then they're going to do outreach to these people and try and marshal them as an antitrust lobbying tool. And then they'll be claiming BS stuff like small businesses oppose government,
right.
Antitrust reform. And it's just really disappointing in a certain way. I guess they're feeling like these are existential threats to their revenue and profitability. And so they're going to do what they can.
It's fascinating, though, that they would take the approach that is at the same time so damaging to anybody who reads through these to their reputation. My perception of Google has declined over the years. I like all the people that work there, but I consistently find them to be incredibly self-interested. But this even knocked my opinion lower. It's like, why can't you? it wouldn't, given how many millions they can send, they would have just as many advocates if they were honest in the email. That's what I don't understand.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think if they had said, "Hey, lobby Congress for us on antitrust reform," they'd have so many advocates.
They could have said, here are issues that before the government that are important to us. What do you think? Give us your opinion about them, right? They could have found out who thought they were.
Yes, there would have been there's a more neutral way for them to have presented this, but
Right.
I think
A more honest way, not neutral, honest. This is dishonest. There's, I mean, it's like, okay, I can take neutral or I can take bias, but I can't take dishonesty. That's what drives me crazy.
Well, it's a psychological manipulation. They're sort of it's a kind of conversion. It's interesting as a marketing exercise, right? It's a conversion funnel.
It is a conversion funnel, and one presumes that they've tested it pretty broadly before they send it to everybody.
Yeah.
So this is the one that got the most clicks.
So it's sort of on the larger issue of antitrust and antitrust reform. I mean, we're getting into sort of crunch time with all these things. There's a privacy bill that may or may not get voted on. There's a couple of other pieces of legislation, but there's the American Competition and Innovation Act, if I said that correctly, which is the one I think that includes the anti-self-preferencing stuff that they're concerned about. And these will all have to be passed, or they will die probably if Congress changes hands. So it's really the calendar year that they have to do this. And all the tech companies are spending millions and millions of dollars, maybe with the exception of Microsoft at the top, to defeat them. And it's kind of coming down to the wire.
I think Microsoft is equally involved. They're just at the other end pulling the strings, trying to cut Google and Facebook off at the knees, or Apple.
Well, they're not as aligned in this case with what's going on with Google and Facebook.
They're not aligned, but they are definitely active. You can smell it in the air.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not sitting completely on the
There's
sidelines.
your skepticism coming back, Mike. That's good. This was only a temporary dip.
Temporary setback.
Well, on sort of on a final note on this topic, one of the pieces this week in the newsletter was about all these simultaneous legal actions happening against Google. I mean, Google has really never been in this position before, where they've got state attorney generals suing them for antitrust. You've got the Department of Justice suing them for antitrust. You've got multiple private litigants. They just settled a case, I think, in New York about sort of unauthorized use of location data. In Europe, they just lost an appeal of a €4 billion judgment. They can't go any further with that. They're just going to have to pay that because it was in the highest court. And there's a $25 billion or euro suit right now against them around digital advertising brought by different publishers in the EU and UK, predominantly news publishers, I believe. So they're facing all kinds of legal pressure. And
the question I would ask about this for another show is this deterring Google from developing any innovative products and use cases? I mean, in other words, are they so sort of wrapped up in this kind of defense? Are they not able to continue to build out innovative products or not?
Well, I would argue no, because I think the teams that are working on products are very separate from the legal teams. I think what hampers Google right now is this kind of bunker mentality that they've gone into, that a lot of tech companies have gone into, which is, we've frozen hiring. We're going to focus on profitability. We're going to focus on squeezing more productivity out of our existing employees. And that's an environment of risk adversity, right? They're not going to be so inclined, even though they've got still a lot of their I forget the Area 120 or whatever.
It just got cut in half, though.
Yeah, right. So they're not doing anything particularly risky now.
Well, and Sundar even put out a memo to that exact effect, saying we need to double down on our primary foci and find ways to be more productive with those.
Right.
So.
Right. Circling the wagons, whatever metaphor.
Around AI first. That was what they said.
Yeah, so there will be
a lot of work to do on that front, Mike.
There is a lot of work to do there. I agree.
There, so.
All right. Well, one of the things we haven't talked about, just as an aside that we can reserve for another session, is we haven't really talked about it at length. Is the amazing stuff going on with all the image creation, the text to image creation that's happening. It's pretty major stuff, and very interesting on multiple fronts. But instead of talking about that, we will turn to you, David, and Apple this week released iOS 16. A lot of downloads already from that, and one big change is that they put the search box on the home screen, which we had talked about when they announced that. And so, what did you find in your exploration of that?
Sure. So I was very excited to try this out, prompted by a tweet from you, in fact, sharing that you had been able to download it and were already experimenting with the search box. So yeah, it's at the bottom, not all the way at the bottom, but probably 80% of the way down the screen. Little subtle gray bubble that says search now on the home screen. And as someone who to this day can't figure out when and how to swipe left to get to whatever the screen is to the left of the home screen. So I basically never used search previously. So I will say it is, from a user standpoint, very easy now to access the search bar. And the search results are, in my mind, unfortunately disappointing, because I would have liked to see a real, I don't know, threat is not exactly the right word, but something that was an alternative to Google. Thank you. And I just don't think it's there by a very long stretch. Mike, you've pointed out previously that Apple's mental model of search, or working model of search, is one that includes results, maybe even biased towards results from the device itself, as opposed to results out in the world. So you see, snippets of text messages that you've sent or sent and received with friends. You may see, in your case, Mike, you've done a lot of photo surfacing in your photo library with search results. That may be something that I find useful over time, but I think as a starting point, to me, the results are just very, very poor when you're talking about things that a typical Google search would answer. And whether that's a straight sort of classic 10 blue link text result, whether that is a answer box, whether that is a local result, I found all three of those things sorely lacking. I asked a question, who's running for governor in Oregon? And Siri gave me our current governor and the guy who ran against her in 2018, not the three candidates that are running next month or 2 months from now. The local results are largely powered by Yelp, and as outside of restaurants, I think were incredibly poor. The web results were just bad. They weren't. They just were very low authority sources, is what I would say. And the number of times that Apple didn't even attempt to answer my search, they just directed me to a link in Brave as my default browser on the iPhone. They directed me to a link in Brave where I could get search results from Brave Search. And so it seems like an incredibly unambitious release. And it seems to me that they are running the same risk that came back to bite them with Apple Maps, where the first product, even though it is very visible and very easy, frictionless experience to get into, that the results are so bad that they're going to poison the well against usage. And I, again, as someone who's not necessarily an Apple fan, but who wants to see a real alternative to Google, I feel like Apple is the company that's best positioned to do that. This was very disappointing. And I would contrast that with our coverage of Yep.com, from the search engine from Ahrefs earlier this year. They obviously, they have a huge problem in terms of trying to attract eyeballs to it. But I think all three of us had a fairly positive initial experience with the quality of the results. We found the UI refreshing. I found none of those things with iOS search, which was just shocking for a company that clearly has invested a substantial number of resources if they felt like it was ready to move to the home screen. And it was a huge disappointment. So,
Mike, do you want to defend Apple?
Well, one is I am curious about user behaviors and user desires. So I think that to a large extent, finding stuff on your phone is problematic, and that has gotten better for me anyways. And I'm frequently looking for old notes or old emails, and and movies and all that stuff is in one spot. So in that sense, it serves that need. The other though is I'm curious whether their relationship with Google to the tune of $9 to $15 billion perhaps inhibits
them
their desire to offer a alternative
true
web
competitor.
experience. Yeah. I mean, why would they? They're making so much money now until such time as they have to. They don't have to.
Yeah, I think that's going to take a hit from all the antitrust activity going on, but we'll see. I think I agree with you that that's in there. That's in the mix in terms of their perhaps reluctance to do a full-blown Google competitor.
I mean, you even see it though in something like local, where reviews they have been so ambivalent about reviews, right? Where they prefer Yelp reviews, and if there are no Yelp reviews, then they will show their own reviews. But so in the case, or no TripAdvisor reviews. So if it's already on Yelp, there's going to be Yelp reviews. If it's already on TripAdvisor, there's probably TripAdvisor reviews. So it's odd.
That may be a contractual thing for them.
Could be.
I don't know. Well, what's interesting here is user expectations, which you just alluded to, and David, you kind of talked about indirectly. So what is the purpose of this? Is this some comprehensive search solution that's designed to give you, material or information on your own device and the internet? I mean, they would probably say yes. It's this federated display, and they've got their knowledge graph, and they've got your emails and your notes, and then they've got they can send you out to the default engine or whatever. And for them, it's probably kind of addressing multiple user scenarios and needs. We find it lacking as a web search alternative to Google. They probably don't look at it through that lens, and then there are the inhibiting factors that we just talked about. But I agree that if they do, it does come off as a kind of haphazard, mediocre experience right now. But I don't think that they would ever create something that was like Google, where that a query in that box would yield a page that looked like Google. I don't think you would ever see that. So the question for them is, it's really a kind of UI UX treatment, putting aside kind of the index and whatever backend stuff that they're doing that may be lacking. And what's weird is, why are they moving it onto the home screen? That's the question in my mind. Why are they moving it onto the home screen? Are they doing that to make it more prominent so they'll get more? I mean, they're making this ads push, right? They're hiring all these people in their ad group. They're going to put more kinds of ads in more places. We're supposed to be getting ads and maps, which means local search ads. So why are they doing this? Is this to then set up a paid search advertising? I mean, they wouldn't do it exclusively for that reason, but is that contemplated in this move? And if that is contemplated, then they need traffic. And if they need traffic, then they have to improve the experience. And it seems like that would be a relatively easy thing for them to do, given their resources.
There's a more benign.
I did get a handful of results that were sort of classic Google web link results. There were only 3 of them by default, but there were like classic 10 blue link results for a handful of searches that I did.
Yeah.
So
they can do it.
They can do it. It's not that they're sort of,
when they have a bot, they have a crawler.
It's not that they're fundamentally opposed to a Google-like search result experience. I just think that they don't know when to return that very well right now, is what I would say, and that the results they return there are pretty poor. So,
well, I'm not saying that it should duplicate Google. I'm just saying that what we have come to expect as web search, I don't think they're going to do. And I
don't think we know for sure. I think if they, if the $9 billion is what's holding them back, I have a feeling that they would get there with ad revenue pretty darn quickly, given the number of eyeballs that are going to be invested in this search box. So,
I would add here, one, that Apple always takes the long view, and they don't always invest at the rate we think they should. But Maps, as you pointed out earlier, is a good example. They've been
Took them 10
tweaking
years.
10 years to get to decency. And, Spotlight and integrated Siri and Spotlight is similar length. But
well, Siri, when was Siri acquired?
2010 or something. It's a long time ago.
So it's a long time
but
ago.
Spotlight is their real effort, and they're trying to integrate into a single user experience. That's complicated. The second thing, though, is that my whole life is on my iPhone, and good local search, local in the sense of local to my device or local to my cloud, is really important. And I am constantly looking up things across the various tools, whether it's calendars or appointments or notes or so for me, photos is a massive improvement because I do so many screenshots. I can now search those photos based on text in the screenshot. So if I want to see all the screenshots of Barbara Oliver, I type Barbara Oliver and up comes a list of all the photos.
20,000 screenshots.
20, that's right.
Local search presentation.
Exactly. So for me, that is a valuable thing because my whole life is there and it is valuable. So I don't know how that relates to others. Obviously not as important to you. So that's my defense. I mean, it's not really a defense, but I agree. Their web and local stuff has always sucked, and it continues to.
Well, I wouldn't say that the local stuff sucks, but I would say it's sort of threadbare, in a way, right? It's just like, if you're looking quickly for a phone number or an address or something, it works, but it's not going to give you much more than that. So why don't we segue into my item here, the final one today, which is kind of a related topic about, are any of these new search initiatives, and there was another one this week in the form of a search assistant chatbot style search engine called Andi, A-N-D-I. The URL is andisearch.com, I believe. And that was a kind of an interesting one that we'll talk about. But there's a lot of activity now in search where there hasn't been, there was a period of doldrums where nothing was going on beyond Google. And we have Neeva, and we have Brave, and we have Yep, and we have Apple, and they're probably
is Bing still around?
Of course.
Good question.
Yeah, that was
I don't
a joke.
see it very often in Google Analytics today.
Well, we could argue. So what's interesting is, are any of these initiatives going to have any impact on Google? And then, of course, we talked about TikTok quite a bit, and younger people, according to Google, defecting to TikTok for certain kinds of queries around restaurants, possibly travel, and certain other kinds of categories. So the totality of these things, is this going to matter? Is it going to, is it, I think before we started the call, David, I think you referred to it as death by 1,000 cuts. Is that what's going on? Or are these just all a bunch of ankle biters that aren't going to have any kind of impact? And search will continue to be defined by Google into the first, unforeseeable future.
At the meta level, I mean, that VCs are investing in this, people perceive that there is some opportunity. What that ultimately looks like in the absence of control of a platform, I don't know. Apple controlling the phone has the best chance to provide an alternative. Facebook is another. Neither have shown much success. Apple is further along than Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook's not doing anything.
Right. And then beyond that, it becomes very difficult to get the exposure you need, to get the volume you need to improve as much as you need to improve to make these things work. You need to understand what people are searching for, how they're searching, and then update your results as a byproduct of that. And it requires volume. So no matter how good something like the Ahrefs search engine is, how do you get the volume?
Well,
but there are a lot of them.
I want to challenge something you just said, because I'm not sure it's true. You said that VCs are investing money in search. I mean, I'm not sure that that's actually true. There may be some money invested in Neeva. I think there is, because the CEO of Neeva is formerly the head of search for Google. And so, that kind of visibility and credibility may have gotten some investment.
Well, then let me rephrase it. That some VC, but entrepreneurs see an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So a risk assessment that there is a perception in the marketplace that there is a chance.
one of the antitrust arguments against Google is that they have shut down investment in certain categories because nobody perceives the ability to compete there, right? Search being the most prominent one. But let's talk about TikTok and this Andi search. You guys hated it. It's a chatbot style search assistant where you type in a query. Looks like
strong word.
It wasn't okay.
It wasn't my
preferred
user. It wasn't my preferred user experience for a search by any stretch.
But it's different. I mean, I thought what was interesting about it was that the results, you have the search box on the left, and then you get a sort of a vertical scrolling kind of graphical presentation with some images and text of the results. It's not links that you then click through to see what the story is. You can sort of surmise that from the results. And I thought that the UI was pretty interesting and potentially appealing to some people.
Firstly, I have this really sore spot for chats. It's like I hate going to a chat on a website and then waiting or then struggling to find which screen the chat is on, or having the chat never come on, or then having to leave and not be able to continue the chat. So the whole metaphor of chatting on the web has been problematic for me in the past. But this implementation, while potentially visually interesting, even though it implied that there was a potential chat possibility, it never delivered that. It was a very linear, I do a search, it gives me a result. It wasn't, oh, Mike, here are 3 alternatives you might want to try to find something closer.
Right. It's not refining. It's not helping you refine the query, right? You could imagine a back and forth where you start with a sort of a generic or high level query, and then it helps you refine, and then you get to some specific result. But in fairness to the company, which I don't really know anything about, it seems like it's a pretty small startup. They characterize it as a fairly stable alpha. So it's a very new product, and they're looking, I guess, to get, this is an MVP. They want to get feedback and see how people use it. And I just think it's interesting because it departs from the traditional Google style search results, which everybody has copied to one degree or another. DuckDuckGo uses it, Bing uses it. And I don't think that's a way to compete against Google. If you're just doing the not as good version of what Google is doing, I don't think anybody's going to care about what you're doing. You have to do something different. And I think this is an interesting, we talked about BlenderBot, which was the Facebook chatbot, which, became sort of racist, homophobic, and, right wing very quickly. But that's I said at the time that was kind of an interesting alternative that people who are used to texting and chatting a lot, for whom that's their preferred kind of way of interacting, might find compelling.
Well, I could see this use case being interesting exposed through an API where you're in iMessage and you hit the app and you're asking it a question, that sort of thing, or just an SMS to a certain number that returns a set of results. Like that kind of thing is potentially interesting. It, from a web experience, as Mike was saying, like going to a browser to get into a chat window just seems like a bit of a stretch to me. So.
Yeah, well, so kind of before we go, just a final point about TikTok. I mean, Mike, you discovered Google integrating TikTok results into mobile search, the mobile SERP for, I think the query was breakfast NYC. But it was really far down the page. It was giving you sort of videos of different restaurants, but it was buried essentially.
It was. I'm going to show it real quickly because I think that the value of it is in the presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
All right.
If we're watching on YouTube, yes. Those on a podcast will not be able to see the screen. So we'll have to
So I have, as Greg pointed out, scrolled very far down the screen. But when I get to this breakfast in New York City TikTok search, it's a carousel with 3 full moving videos. They're actually very active. So it ends up being very very eye-catching. This isn't a normal static search. It's very active. And you
By
can
video, these are effectively animated GIFs, however. These are not sort of...
Well,
Yes.
it's more,
Yeah.
and it's more than 3. It looks like you can scroll to the right, and it looks like there are 5 or 6 or more.
that's right. There's, I think, 6, 7, 8.
Keeps
I don't know.
going.
They keep
Keeps
going,
going.
right? They're
Yeah.
stopped there. But each of these is animated, and it's just fascinating that it is so dynamic. So this speaks to, one, it's very far down the page. Clearly, they have not optimized. This speaks to David's point last week or 2 weeks ago that TikTok has not done a good job of optimization. It's pretty far down the page. I mean, it's
they haven't even made an attempt to build a sort of classic Yelp style directory, which again just strikes me as mind blowing that somebody inside of some senior growth person inside of TikTok either doesn't recognize or hasn't been able to effectively make the case that we could steal tens of millions of eyeballs from Google search every single month. And given that their model, Greg, as you've said, is largely display advertising, theoretically, eyeballs are what they care about the most. So
it may be a big initiative for them that they're not, they're not used to thinking of themselves as a search engine, even though they're starting to think in those terms, I think. So it may be coming at some point, but they may be sort of too fat and happy with their existing revenues to sort of configure things. And there's also the question of TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, and we don't know what sort of approvals need to be made for different kinds of initiatives. So they may have limited authority to do anything radically different than what the parent is doing, or they may be autonomous in terms of the product direction. I don't really know the answer to that. Sort of two quick points about TikTok. One is, it's really all about discovery right now, not search. And so that's part of the appeal, is that you don't know what's coming. And if you're following a bunch of people, you sort of know, but there's always sort of new content. And so there's a kind of serendipitous dimension to it, although people do use it to find things to some degree. So there's that, which is a different use case. Although Google does offer local discovery to some degree on its Discover feed. And then, oh my God, I'm having a senior moment here.
I resemble that remark.
Yes. Expletive. God. All right. I've forgotten the second point I was going to make. That's really embarrassing.
Stay tuned for episode 83.
Yeah. 80 what? What number? No, it's interesting because I know what I was going to say. One of the interesting things right now is that there's too much information. Google overtook Yahoo years and years ago when the web exploded and there was just enormous volume of content. And so Google had developed a method to reliably rank and present that information. It was no longer susceptible to human curation, the Yahoo directory being the metaphor for that. And now we have the opposite problem. There's just too much information and too much junk online, which is part of the helpful content update rationale. And so I don't think people care about comprehensiveness. I think people want, really relevant information. Show me 3 links, to your point about Apple search. 3 links is fine if they're good links. I don't need to see 20. And so I think we're in a kind of a different environment now from a search standpoint, and there's some interesting opportunities. You don't have to have the biggest index now, I think, to do something really interesting. And so TikTok, with a smaller number of results, or Apple search with a smaller number of results, might be in a position to steal some usage.
I would contend that in local search, there is a need for relevance plus truth as opposed to truthiness that Google approaches, right? Spam results are a good example. They're very relevant. They're just deceptive and dishonest. And Google has never made the commitment to truth in local. And I think that the the company that will win in local has to take that next step, that it's beyond relevance. It's relevance plus accuracy. And so,
well, I mean, the one of
it's
the
a big
things that-
problem, and it's hard to solve. I mean,
one of the things that people say about TikTok is that it offers more authenticity than Google in certain categories. Now, I'm not sure that that's 100% true, but you get the sense of authenticity because you're seeing people talk about things. You're seeing real people showing you something. And so there's a kind of a sense that you're getting something more authentic than a review, which may be fraudulent, or some static description, which may have been written by some machine or something like that. So it's an interesting time. I mean, this is an interesting time again in search, where we went through a decade where nothing was happening pretty much other than Google. So that brings us to another, the conclusion of another exciting episode. For the next roughly month, I think Mike is on vacation. He's speaking at the Synda conference in Florence, Italy. Let's feel bad for Mike for that. And then you're taking a bike trip.
The world's tiniest violin on the
Yes.
banks of the Oltrano, Mike.
Yes.
a bike trip from Newcastle to Edinburgh, and then exploring Portugal, and then exploring Florence area. So
that's a great trip. But Mike will be gone for the next month, and we will maybe take a couple of breaks, but also fill in with some guests that should be interesting. So please stay with us. Subscribe and tell your friends about the Near Media newsletter, and have a great week.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.